Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel. I hope you are enjoying the story of embryology topics. In this video we will see the Kutti story of development of cardiovascular system. Once upon a time, in the beginning weeks, the tiny embryo was thin and peaceful. All is calm. First 2 weeks, the diffusion was sufficient to fulfill the nutrition of the embryo. As the embryo grew thicker, embryo faces a problem. The diffusion declined. I can't reach everyone anymore. The mesoderm came for help, listened carefully. The sufferings of the embryo, what can we do? Then we shall build a river. So began the story of cardiovascular system, the first functional system of the human body. This is the chapter 1, the birth of rivers, vasculogenesis. In the warm extraembryonic mesoderm of the yolk sac, small clusters of cells appeared, blood islands. Some cells bravely chose to become blood cells, others flattered themselves to delicate endothelial linings. Together they formed the first blood vessels from scratch. This miraculous process is called vasculogenesis. Soon tiny streams connected and expanded within the embryo itself. Now this process is known as angiogenesis. Now starts the story of the primitive heart. Around the third week, two tiny heart tubes fused into single tube. So from tail end to head end, this tube consists of four loyal segments. They are sinus venosus, primitive atrium, primitive ventricle, bulbus cordis. So from inflow to outflow, four segments of the primitive heart tube. The sinus venosus is the gentle receiver at the tail end. So this sinus venosus at the tail end receives blood from the yolk sac, blood from the placenta, and from the embryo also. It said, bring everything to me, I will pass it on. That is the sinus venosus. That will become the smooth part of the right atrium and the coronary sinus. The next chamber is the primitive atrium, the holding chamber. So this is sinus venosus and this is the primitive atrium holding chamber, a single spacious room. It expanded like a waiting hall from sinus venosus, collecting the blood from sinus venosus and waiting for the next push. I will gather and prepare. That is primitive atrium. Sinus venosus to primitive atrium. It forms the trabeculated parts of both atria, right atrium and left atrium. The third part of the primitive heart is the primitive ventricle. That is the power chamber. Just ahead of primitive atrium, then stands the primitive ventricle, that is the muscular pump. So from atrium to primitive ventricle. This primitive ventricle will form the inflow tracts of both ventricles. Fourth chamber of the primitive heart is the bulbus cordis. It is the outflow architect. It is in the head end. At the cranial end stood this bulbus cordis, energetic and forward looking, and it guided blood out of the heart into the great arterial pathways. I will shape the exit routes. So from right ventricle to the bulbus cordis, that makes the outflow tracts, that is ascending aorta and pulmonary trunk. It also gives rise to the outflow tracts of the both ventricles. Now comes the dance of looping of the heart. The heart, primitive heart is now getting a step for dance. The straight heart tube soon realized I need space to grow. So I have to bend. That is the dance of the primitive heart. It twisted and bent gracefully to the right in a beautiful dance called cardiac looping. The atrium rose upward and backward, and sinus venosus gets tucked behind the right atrium. This looping decided the future position of chambers. Bulbus Cordis, primitive ventricle, primitive atrium, the sinus venosus tucked behind the primitive atrium. A small misstep here could change everything. In this picture, you are seeing the dance of this primitive heart tube, straight heart tube into C shape, then S shaped. So that decides the adult position of the chambers of the heart. One tube, so that now it is going to decide the adult heart. A simple straight line, primitive heart arrange itself in the beginning. Sinus venosus, primitive atrium, primitive ventricle, bulbus cordis. Soon this tube would loop, partition, remodel, transform into the four-chambered heart. But every heartbeat of adult life would always remember the humble beginning as a simple tube with four segments and one purpose to keep life flowing. This is the story of the development of the primitive heart into definitive heart. In the next story, we will continue the septation of the atria and the ventricles. I hope you have understood this development of the cardiovascular system. With the next storytelling of the cardiovascular system topic, we will meet in the next video. Thank you.